there's a certain percentage when the schools have a certain percentage of children that are low socioeconomic, then they get extra funding per pupil as well. So I knew that the state had been allocating more funding towards schools that were of need, but the performance was not on par. One of the questions that I asked during our committee was, well, are we evaluating the programs that we have in our schools to see whether or not they're actually providing the outcome which is intended when these programs are put in place, whatever it may be? Are we evaluating these programs to ensure that they're actually producing, right? What's the return on the investment? Sounds terrible to put it in that manner, but are our children benefiting from these programs and that money being spent on those programs? Because obviously not, right? Because the state is coming in and asking for additional funding for programs. And so what came to light was the fact that we were not necessarily evaluating programs. We're just adding programs and requesting more funding to add more programs. Every single year I asked, perhaps we need to reevaluate programs. And I asked, it was a specific question that I asked in the committee, well, in your capacity and your expertise, how long should we have programs in place before we evaluate and decide whether or not we should continue with these programs with our kids, or decide, we're not seeing the output that we are expecting, and replace them with something else? They did not know at the time. They said, Senator, we don't have that information. We can't tell you right now what we think about, how long we should wait before we reevaluate these programs. 2 years ago was the very first time the governor's office came back with an allocation of funding for programs. And they specifically, they looked at me and they said, and we're asking that we evaluate these programs after 3 years to ensure that they actually have the outcome that we need. Now, as I've spoken to various industry leaders, they have different variety of timeframes that they believe programs should be in place. I was just speaking to a gentleman this week, actually, that came to see us, and I asked him, well, how long should we evaluate these programs for before we know, whether they're working on it? He goes, honestly, holistically speaking, about 7 years. And I thought, do we really have 7 years to evaluate a program when we're talking a child between the ages of 5 and 17 or 18? That's a long period of time for us to reconsider and say those programs are not working. So I think that is something that is going to be a little more helpful moving forward, is the fact that now we're asking the right questions of accountability. We're spending this money, but what are we receiving in return? What are our children producing? How are they developing? And we're looking at the whole child. We're looking at just the academically. We're doing a lot of investment also on behavioral health, ensuring that they have programs, right? The physical health, the behavioral health, along with the academics. So holistically looking at a child. So I think as we continue to move forward, that has to continue to be our lens, and asking those that are in different capacities, including a superintendent of schools, how long before we see the output. There's another component that we have to consider as well, and something that I've addressed also in our Committee on Education in the Senate, and that's the fact that we have a lot of migrant children, a lot of immigrant children. Children are coming into the country every single year, if not every single week in some schools. I had an opportunity to speak to a teacher in Yucaipa, in the city of Yucaipa, who was at an alternative school, and at the time literally had multiple children from different countries with very, very unique languages. Imagine not having the tools or speaking the language to address the learning needs of a child from Africa, right? From a little village out in Africa or Asia. And so it's not just children that are coming in from Latin America, which historically, traditionally, this is the biggest number of kids that we have that are immigrant coming in, English language learners, are from Latin America. Well, we can, focusing a lot on training teachers that are bilingual, that can address those needs. But what do we do when we're having literally 7, 8, 11 different languages, children, young adults who are going to be in our system for maybe 2 or 3 years before they technically graduate from high school and move on into our society? There's a lot of challenges that are very unique to California that impact academically, but regardless, regardless, our English language, just our English-speaking children, how are they doing? When we look at the performance levels in the state of California between our English language learners and our English speakers, believe it or not, we've seen more growth in our English language learners than we have in our English-speaking students.
Why is that?
Good question. Good question. So the focus has been right now on parents really getting engaged in education, right? We've seen a societal, cultural, sort of a fight these past couple of years of where parents are wanting to have more choice in schooling options versus our public school system saying, no, we need these kids. We don't want any more children to actually exit the declining enrollment that we have in our public schools. We have to ask ourselves, why do we have a declining enrollment in public schools in California? And a lot of it has to do with the fact that children are not performing. They're not getting those, they're not having the reading, the math scores, the science scores. They're really at the bottom of when you consider all of the country's performance of schools. We're towards the bottom. And we've asked this of our educators. We've asked this of our superintendent of schools. We have to take a closer look as to what our focus has been, because a lot of the times you'll hear the number one reason for not having the performance that we should be expecting from our students. Well, we don't have enough funding. Our schools are underfunded. And to that, when I hear that and I speak to my teachers and to our superintendents in our schools, and I said, well, I want you to take in consideration the fact that we spend 40% of the California's budget on education. 40. We still have healthcare to fund. We have transportation to fund. We have government, public safety. Those are still within the purview of government to be able to fund. And healthcare is very expensive. Infrastructure is very expensive. All of it is very expensive, right? So how much more are we supposed to spend solely on education? Which is why, once again, going back to, we have to consider evaluating the programs that we have in place. Does it take a lot of money to teach a child how to read? Unless that child has a physical, behavioral disability, it doesn't take a lot to teach a child to read. We have parents that are asking, well, what are you teaching our children? Are you focusing on the basic reading, writing, math, science? Or are we now philosophically trying to, quote unquote, indoctrinate our children with certain societal ideas, cultural ideas? Is that the space of education? And this is where there's been a real fight between parents and schools and the state, right? Coming and saying, this is what we're going to teach our kids, this is going to be allowed. And parents now realizing, wait a minute, what kind of books do we have in the school? What philosophies are you teaching my child? Shouldn't you just focusing on how to read, how to analyze text when they're in junior high and high school, as they get older, 6th grade maybe and up? Or should we be telling them how to think and what to think?